Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is meeting university leaders up and down the country today over campus protests.
Yes, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, is joining the Prime Minister and university leaders to discuss tackling anti-Semitism on campuses.
So, as the Prime Minister is meeting all of these university bosses, we're asking, is it time to clamp down on student protests at British universities, or would that be a affront to civil liberties? Joining us now to debate this is author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid, who doesn't think that university protests should be clamped down on, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, who does think they should be. Rebecca, so many Jewish groups, anti-Semitism campaigners have expressed multiple concerns about students feeling intimidated, harassed on campuses, and it's clear these protests are very much adding towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely respect and understand that. And anti-Semitism is intolerable and should not be tolerated. I think the difficulty is it's a very, very broad tool to say because there is anti-Semitism happening on some campuses at some protests, we are going to shut down protests. And I am worried about the government's increasingly intolerant attitude towards protest in general. I think Suella Braverman illustrated that fairly clearly, that it seems like they would like to be able to shut down protests more and more often. And I feel like that's a slippery slope. I think the right to protest should be an inalienable human right.
Well, let's throw that over to Neil Hamilton. Neil, is this not a tricky one for free speech absolutists? There's lots of things that are legal to say in the United Kingdom that happen to be anti-Semitic, that happen to be horrible, and you wouldn't want to say, but they're still legal.
Yeah, but the real intolerance here, of course, is the cause that these students are demonstrating in favour of. You know, from the river to the sea means the physical annihilation of the state of Israel, and along with that goes the annihilation of the Jewish people in the minds of quite a lot of the Hamas-related hotheads who are behind these protests ultimately. Of course, the students are just the useful idiots for these people. You know, I've lived through this many times before in my lifetime. When I was a student, it was the high point of student revolt in 1968. They were real demonstrations compared with the ones that we got today. It's a question of proportion, isn't it? These permanent demonstrations have not gone on for too long. Yes, I believe in the right to free speech and the right to make your point, but not when it's every single week and it's there in your face every single day. And by the scale and size of these marches, they are in themselves intimidating to Jewish students and Jewish minorities. There are only 300,000 Jews in the whole country, 6.5 million Muslims. And given the scale of these marches in London and elsewhere, as well as in universities, I think that it's out of all proportion, and vice-chancellors ought to take a tough line.
Rebecca, we've seen how these types of protests have escalated over in the United States on university campuses over there. Is there not an argument to try and nip them in the bud here?
I don't think so, because I think however much you dislike a cause, you still have to tolerate the right to protest. So I find the anti-abortion marches abhorrent. I think if you are anti-choice, you are a fundamentally evil human being. However, they still have to do it. I don't think there's an excuse for it. I think it's an intolerable attitude. However, they still have to be able to have their marches. They just do. Otherwise, if you say no to ones that you don't like when you're in power, people will say no to the ones that they don't like when you're in power. We have to let everybody have their go. And yes, they are annoying, and yes, they are in your face. But as with Just Stop Oil, as with any of them, protest is designed to be inconvenient and attention grabbing. It's not a protest if you all queue up neatly and let people go ahead.
Neil?
Well, it's a conflict of rights, isn't it? It's a conflict of rights. Peaceful, law-abiding citizens have a right to go about their lives in the way that they want, not inhibited or in any way inconvenienced by other people. Now, there has to be a balance here, and all I'm saying is there should be a balance, and the balance so far is skewed very, very heavily in favour of the disruptors. You don't have every week anti-abortion marches up and down the country in vast numbers. Whatever your views are on abortion, you know, I believe both sides should have the right peacefully to protest. If it goes beyond a certain point, then I think the general public has a right to say that our rights need to be considered and taken into account.
May I just ask Rebecca something? Because we have seen at one university, I'm sure you've seen the story, a pro-Israel, a Jewish student, waved an Israeli flag. It immediately got ripped off him from pro-Palestine protesters at a university. Should that not be an indication then to just shut down that protest? Clearly, it's discriminatory against one student. Do their rights not count?
I think there's two things. Firstly, we have to be really careful that we don't conflate being pro-Israel and being Jewish. Those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. So there are Jewish people who do not support Israel, and there are non-Jewish people who do support Israel. So I think it's just important when we talk about it not to conflate the two. I would say that you have to wait for something illegal to happen before you can arrest somebody. And if anybody is being anti-Semitic, they should be thrown out of university. It should be properly investigated first, obviously, but they should not be able to continue at the university, and the police should intervene completely. But you have to let something happen before you can convict somebody of it. And I think, like, shutting down protests because something might happen is so dangerous and so slippery. And then it's easy for any person in power to say, well, we think these people might be a bit dangerous one day, so we'll stop them before it's happened. And then you are stopping protest.
Neil, you mentioned the 1960s, 1968, 1969. In Paris, in the United Kingdom, in California, the world was on fire at universities. I mean, this is nothing in comparison. Surely it doesn't merit the same sort of clampdown that we saw in the late 1960s.
Well, in October 1968, during the Democrat convention in Chicago, the mayor actually, the university actually got the National Guard to fire on the students. Well, I'm not suggesting that we should go back to that, obviously. But I do think that we've got to keep things in proportion here. And the main point that I want to make also is that what is the purpose of these demonstrations? Ultimately, there isn't going to be a ceasefire because Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire in the long term. They want to annihilate the state of Israel. So it's a preposterous proposition to start with. And given that the idea behind this is to destroy a state and a people by overt acts of violence, in a sense, these demonstrations are trying to sanitize something which is revolting. And we've seen demonstrations, for example, on National Holocaust Day, which are about the most disgusting sight that you would ever see, the behavior that took place then. So I don't think that we can give any credence to the motives of the people behind these protests. Why aren't they protesting about the hostages that Hamas still won't release? What about the October the 7th massacres, which are the ultimate cause of all this current turmoil in the Middle East? That's what they should be protesting against. The right for Israel peacefully to exist.
Rebecca, just a quick word from you to finish.
I would just say that what a lot of I believe in Israel's right to exist, but what I would say is a lot of these students are protesting against their university having links in terms of funding, sponsorship and research with Israel as a state. So it's not that they are saying, they're not demonstrating because they want it to be.
Well, why not they demonstrating?
Well, Rebecca,
may I just say, Rebecca, it is worth pointing out that Israel is a huge part of a lot of Jewish people's identity. So ripping an Israeli flag out of a Jewish student's hand is seen as incredibly inflammatory to many Jewish people and a stigmatization. But I accept what you say, that not all Jewish people are as attached to Israel in the same sense. But thank you very much, Rebecca Reed and Neil Hamilton. Good stuff. Right.